You're dead weight. My father didn't lower his voice. He didn't check who might be listening. He stood in the open doorway while rain hammered the porch like it was trying to force its way inside, and he said it loud enough for the neighbors across the street to hear. "Get out," he added, shoving a black trash bag into my chest. The plastic tore. Clothes spilled onto the soaked concrete. Jeans, a hoodie, papers I hadn't finished sorting yet. My life, scattered and immediately ruined by the rain. "I'm done carrying you." The storm surged, wind throwing icy water straight into my face. It soaked through my shoes in seconds. I was 28 years old, and my father had just kicked me out like an unpaid bill. "No real career," he continued, voice sharp and practiced, like this was a speech he'd rehearsed. "No savings, no plan. You sit in that room pretending you're building something while you drain my money and my patience. You add nothing. You cost me space, you cost me peace. You're dead weight." He waited. For tears. For begging. For me to collapse and promise to do better. I didn't. I knelt down, calmly gathered my things, and zipped the torn bag shut. My hand shook, not from fear, but from the cold biting through my skin. Rain dripped from my hair onto the concrete. I looked up at him, and I smiled. Not wide, not defiant, just enough to make him hesitate. "You think this is funny?" he snapped. I didn't answer. I stepped past him once, back inside the house for less than 10 seconds, long enough to walk into his office, long enough to place one plain white envelope in the center of his desk. No name, no note. Then I walked back into the storm. Before I tell you what was inside that envelope and why my father's hands went pale when he opened it, tell me this in the comments. What's the cruelest thing a parent has ever said to you when you needed them most? I didn't run. I didn't collapse. I walked 3 blocks down the street until the house lights blurred behind the rain, then stopped under a flickering bus shelter that smelt like rust and wet concrete. The storm drummed against the plastic roof in uneven bursts, loud enough to drown out panic if I let it. I didn't. I stood there, soaked through, breathing slowly, controlled, measured, the same way you keep yourself steady when everything around you is unstable. People think getting thrown out is loud, screaming, crying, slamming doors. They're wrong. The loud part ends fast. What comes next is quiet, and quiet is where people like my father start to unravel. I pulled my phone from my pocket. The screen lit up with missed calls. 3 of them, all within 2 minutes of me leaving. I didn't answer. I didn't text. Silence wasn't shock. It was a choice. My father needed a response the way some people need oxygen, an apology, a message that said, "You're right, I can't survive without you." When that message didn't come, his anger wouldn't cool. It would turn inward. I checked the time. 9:47 p.m. Right about then, he'd be sitting at his desk, staring at the envelope, pretending he didn't care, telling himself it was another dramatic attempt to manipulate him. He'd open it anyway, because not knowing would bother him more than whatever was inside. I leaned back against the bench, rainwater running down my spine, and closed my eyes. That envelope wasn't emotional. It wasn't reactive. It was something I'd prepared long before the storm ever started. The rain pulled me backward into a memory I'd spent years trying to outgrow. Thanksgiving, 2 years ago. The house warm, loud, full of relatives who only spoke to me when they needed something fixed. My father sat at the head of the table, carving the turkey like he was performing a ceremony. Control always looked good on him when there was an audience. "So," he said without looking at me, "are you still working on that thing?" I knew what he meant. He always called it that. Never my work, never my job. "It's a contract role," I said carefully. "Remote, project-based." He laughed, not a chuckle, a full dismissive laugh that made my aunt smile nervously and my cousin stare into her plate. "Translation," he said, finally meeting my eyes, "unemployed." The table went quiet. He liked that part, the silence that proved everyone was listening. "You're almost 30, he continued, slicing the meat with unnecessary force. "Still living under my roof, still figuring things out. You think potential pays bills? You think ideas are worth anything without results? I felt the familiar heat in my face, the instinct to explain, to defend, to prove. I didn't. Because while he was lecturing me about responsibility, he didn't know that 2 hours earlier I'd closed a deal that would cover his mortgage for a year. He didn't know the quiet work I did at night, the contracts that didn't need applause, the money that didn't announce itself. He saw what he wanted to see, a failure, a burden, dead weight. That was the role he assigned me long before the storm, long before the envelope, and he never questioned it. That was his real mistake. People assume calm means weakness. They think if you're not loud, you must be losing. What they never consider is that some people go quiet because they're busy counting, timing, angles, exits. I learned that early, long before my father ever called me dead weight. I don't panic in storms, I plan in them. While the rain soaked through my jacket at the bus stop, I pulled my bag closer and checked my phone again. Not his calls this time. A different notification, one I'd been expecting. Sent, received, logged. That was all it said. Enough. My father liked to believe I sat in my room pretending to work, that whatever I did on my laptop was a hobby he tolerated out of pity. What he never bothered to understand was why I never asked him for money anymore, why I stopped explaining myself, why I never argued when he underestimated me. I'd learned something he never did. The loudest people rarely control anything. They just announce. Real leverage doesn't look impressive. It looks boring. It looks like emails sent at odd hours, documents saved under generic names, accounts that don't draw attention until someone is stupid enough to trigger them. I built my life that way on purpose. Quiet income, quiet ownership, quiet contingencies. My father thought he was carrying me. In reality, I'd been making sure his house stayed warm, his account stayed open, and his problems stayed delayed, without him ever noticing the hand underneath the table. That night in the rain, I wasn't scared of being homeless. I was waiting, because the envelope on his desk wasn't a threat. It was a receipt. And once he read it, everything he thought he owned, including the power he'd held over me, was going to change shape. My father didn't throw me out because I was useless. He threw me out because I'd stopped being convenient. That's the part people miss. Men like him don't explode when they're winning. They explode when the numbers stop lining up and they don't understand why. He was drowning long before the storm started. I knew it because desperation leaves fingerprints. Late-night phone calls he took in his office with the door locked. Bills that arrived in plain envelopes instead of branded ones. The way he'd started snapping at small things, lights left on, groceries bought without asking, the Wi-Fi being slow. Those weren't anger problems, they were stress leaks. 6 months earlier, he'd asked me a question he pretended was casual. "Hey," he said, hovering in my doorway, arms crossed, "that thing you do online, it pays sometimes, right?" Sometimes. That was the word that scared him. Because his money wasn't coming in anymore. Not like before. His reputation was intact, but reputation doesn't pay interest, and pride doesn't cover gaps when lenders start calling. I realized later what he'd been doing. He was waiting for me to fail, waiting for me to beg, waiting for a reason to justify cutting me loose before I became another liability he couldn't carry. The storm just gave him an excuse. Kicking me out wasn't discipline. It was liquidation. He thought removing me would simplify his life, reduce expenses, eliminate a variable he couldn't control. What he didn't understand was that variables don't disappear when you erase them. Sometimes they turn into consequences, and sometimes they come back in an envelope. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was scared, but because I was deliberate. By morning, my phone was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that means someone is watching, not calling, waiting to see if I'd break first. So I gave him exactly what he expected. At 8:12 a.m., I sent one message. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have smiled. I panicked. I don't know where I'm going to go. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen. counting the seconds. 3 dots appeared almost instantly. "Good," he replied. "We'll talk tonight. You need to be realistic." Realistic. That was his favorite word when he thought he was winning. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't mention the rain or the trash bag or the way he said dead weight like he was cleaning out a garage. I let him believe the storm had finally washed the defiance out of me. We agreed to meet at his office, neutral ground, his territory. He liked that. It made him feel in control, made him careless. I packed light, just my bag, my laptop, and nothing that looked like confidence. By the time I walked toward his building that evening, I had my shoulders slumped just right, my answers rehearsed, my voice practiced to sound tired instead of sharp. He needed to believe I was there to negotiate. He needed to believe the envelope hadn't scared me. Because the truth was, the envelope wasn't the end. It was the door he was about to walk through on his own. My father's office was exactly how he liked it. Dark wood, leather chairs, framed certificates aligned with military precision. It smelled like old paper and control, the kind of room designed to make people feel small before they ever sat down. I arrived 5 minutes early, not to be polite, to observe. He was already there, standing behind his desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled up like he'd been working hard all day. He hadn't. He wanted to look like he had. Appearances mattered more than truth in that room. "You look rough," he said, eyes flicking over me with something close to satisfaction. "That's what happens when you make emotional decisions." I nodded, said nothing, took the chair across from him, let my shoulders sag. Good, he thought. She's learned. He gestured to the desk, tapping the wood where the envelope had been the night before. It was gone now, filed, processed, opened and reread more than once. "We need to be practical," he said, settling into his chair. "This can't become a bigger problem than it already is." Problem. That was me. I watched his hands as he spoke, the way his fingers drummed when he was nervous, the way his jaw tightened when he was lying to himself. He believed this meeting was about boundaries, about rules, about me crawling back into line. What he didn't know was that the room itself was part of the trap. The office phone, the server on the wall, the glass door he hadn't bothered to fully close. Everything in that space recorded, logged, backed up. He leaned forward. "Before we talk about you coming back, we need to clear something up." I met his eyes for the first time. "About the envelope?" I asked quietly. His face tightened. "Yes, about that." And that's when I knew he'd read it. He didn't yell this time. That's how I knew the envelope had done its job. He sat back in his chair, steepled his fingers, and sighed like a man burdened by someone else's irresponsibility. That was always his move when he wanted to sound reasonable. "You put me in a difficult position," he said slowly, "leaving something like that on my desk. Do you have any idea how serious this could have been if the wrong person saw it?" I stayed quiet. Silence makes people fill it with truth. "You think you're clever," he continued, leaning forward now, "but you don't understand how things work. That account was temporary. I was going to fix it." Temporary. That was the word. "So you moved the money," I said carefully, "without authorization." He waved a hand. "I borrowed it. Family does that. I needed liquidity, just for a few months." The office phone's indicator light blinked softly on the desk. Recording. He didn't notice. "You took it because the audit was coming," I added, keeping my voice flat. "And you couldn't explain the gap." His jaw tightened. "You don't know what pressure feels like," he snapped. "You don't know what it's like to have everything depending on you. Employees, creditors, reputation. I was protecting us." Us. That was the tell. "So when you kicked me out," I said carefully, That was about simplifying things? He exhaled hard. You were a liability. Someone had to make a decision. There it was. Misuse of funds, intent, motive, all spoken freely, calmly, into a system that logged every second. He leaned back, satisfied. This stays between us, he said. Sign what I give you and we can move on. I nodded once. Then I stood up. I won't be signing anything, I said quietly, but thank you for explaining it so clearly. His confidence flickered. Just for a second. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse him. I simply opened the glass door the rest of the way. The sound shifted immediately. Footsteps, a pause, then the quiet, unmistakable presence of people who weren't there to negotiate. My father turned in his chair, irritation already forming on his face. This is a private meeting, he said sharply. You can't just... Actually, a calm voice interrupted, it isn't. The man stepped in with a tablet in his hand. Suit unremarkable, posture precise. Not law enforcement, not yet. Worse, compliance. He continued, we received a flagged recording tied to a protected account, along with documentation that corroborates it. My father stood up too fast. This is a misunderstanding. It usually is, the man replied, unmoved, until it isn't. He tapped the screen. My father's own voice filled the room. Clear, unedited, undeniable. I borrowed it. I needed liquidity. Color drained from his face. What happens now? He asked, quieter. The answer came without emotion. Now the accounts freeze. An audit begins, and this conversation becomes evidence. I picked up my bag. I didn't need to say anything else. He didn't beg. That surprised me. Instead, he straightened his jacket, forced a thin smile, and said the one thing men like him always reach for when the ground disappears beneath them. You know this won't end well for you either. There it was, the last card. You think freezing accounts doesn't ripple? You think people won't ask questions? You lived under my roof. You benefited. They'll look at you, too. I paused at the door. Let them, I said. His smile cracked. I can still fix this, he snapped. I can say you misunderstood, that you're unstable, emotional. I can... You already spoke, I replied calmly, and it was recorded. The silence that followed wasn't anger. It was panic. I didn't go back to the bus shelter. By the time I stepped outside, the rain had thinned to a steady drizzle, like the storm had said everything it needed to say. I walked until my shoulders loosened, until the city noise replaced his voice in my head. I didn't feel victorious. I felt lighter. That night, I slept on a friend's couch with my phone on silent. No calls, no apologies, just space. In the morning, the envelope was already doing its work without me. People think revenge is loud. It isn't. It's quiet. It's walking away without needing the last word. It's knowing you're no longer trapped. He called me dead weight, but weight only drags you down if you carry it. And I finally put it down.